born in Georgetown, 1930, above the cafe on Front Street, which was our home at that time. We were living there, and Mother was trying to get to the hospital, and she couldn't, so I was born right there on Front Street. Mother was very interested in having a home, which Daddy was not, but she won, and the house on Front Street, the brick house at 1112, became my home then when I was 6 years old. Mom finally got her wish of having a home not at the cafe. Two sisters, Louise and Margaret.
Right, and your brother Pete.
And my brother Pete. My mother's name is Catherine. My dad is Escie,
Okay.
E-S-C-I-E.
Right, and most of the people in town thought of that as two letters.
That's
EC.
it,
They
and
thought of
that's what it
as EC.
became. So
Okay.
legally, that's what it became on, with signatures that were needed, that was acceptable.
Right.
Because nobody wanted to see this E-S-C-I-E. Daddy would have said that what they did was call their last name twice
Right.
as the first and last name Thomas. And once at Ellis Island, they didn't accept that as correct.
Right.
And that's when they, I think, gave him these really initials. And when Daddy met her, he fell in love with her. He thought that she was just the cat's meow and let her know that very quickly. Daddy was 10 years older than Mother, but asked if he could marry her right away. And my mother was 15 when she married my 24-year-old father. My mother came from a family of 8. She had, I think with herself, 5 sisters, and my Uncle Joe and Uncle Paul, 2 brothers. He was a loudmouth. He loved to be heard. He loved to be able to answer questions, and he had a wonderful laugh that my brother Pete would get very annoyed at times because Uncle Paul would keep on laughing instead of learning to stop somewhere.
Right.
They were
Both in
very
age
good
and-
friends for many years. Pete was in the Navy, Uncle Paul was in the Army. My Aunt Martha and Aunt Ann were very close to our mother, and they became a part of our family visiting, and a lot of times we thought they would never leave. Honest to goodness. And they were very dear, but it was like, go home a while and leave us alone. One bathroom at the time of all these people, and 4 bedrooms.
Okay.
And in those 4 bedrooms, one of those became Uncle Si's because he had a lot of lady lovers. Daddy, I don't think Daddy ever found out how, and I was very young then, but they would always pat me, and make me feel like I was just the sweetest little girl they ever met. And then they go upstairs and have their privacy with Uncle Si. And I really don't think Daddy ever knew that. See, Uncle Si worked at the pool hall, and he later became the manager, so he could leave anytime he wanted. When that time of 2 o'clock came to close for lunch,
After lunch.
Daddy would get a little bit of rest and sleep, and then he'd gather all these buddies of his, and they would gamble, play poker, all through the night. Daddy might get a few hours of sleep and open the cafe for business. If the police changed from the wonderful chief that we had, that's when that began to happen, because they didn't know us that well, I guess, as a family, and didn't agree that it just should be open field on gambling in Front Street. Well, it could have been about a minute of time that happened.
Right, right.
Because the jail was right close to the cafe over there. And so he put them all in there, and then he just let them there for a little bit, and they were back out. I didn't even know it was happening. Of course, I was still pretty young then, but... And I would be one to take it over to those jailbirds. I loved it. I always tried to be there at lunchtime so that I could, and Daddy would really give them a lot of food.
Right.
And he'd wrap it really well so that it'd be hot when it got there. And they were so sweet to me, those men, you know. Oh, we wish we had a little girl like you. So that was like one of my favorite errands to do. And it was right downstairs, and it had bars on the window, but the door was large with just a few bars. And of course, they would always like to be shouting out from, you know, to get people's attention. The back table was one in which there were several men who were good friends, and they were businessmen who had their business on Front Street. And they wanted to be together at lunchtime. And so that table was right outside of the kitchen. Now it's in the front, but then it was in there. And they would try to take as much time as they could to laugh and talk and not be businessmen for that hour. Oh my goodness, he did not like tourists very much. But one of the incidents, if I could relate it to you, was a young man who was a salesperson, and he loved coming in the cafe from the first time he came in. And but every 2 weeks when he came, he would come in, and Daddy would come over and fuss at him because he didn't eat what Daddy wanted him to eat. Okay. He wanted eggs and whatever else. And Daddy would just come, and he would cuss him out in Arabic, and then he'd go back into the kitchen. And this young fellow would just smile and say, "Thank you, Mr. Escie," and he'd leave. We learned very shortly, about a few weeks, that he was Arabic, that he knew everything Daddy was saying. Whoa. He was as good at speaking it as Daddy was. And Daddy fell in love with this guy. Then he'd come and sit with him most of the time when he'd come in. She was, honey. And if she had not been, I'm not sure people would have laughed at Daddy's eccentricness as much as they did, because Mother loved all those customers. We knew them all for the businesses on Front Street, and they knew that Miss Catherine welcomed them every day. And so they withstood Daddy's behavior. Mother, welcoming, always smiling, telling customers thank you as they were leaving, which Daddy never would do. He would tell them something in Arabic like, "Get out of here." He was a Clemson fan, and every time he learned something about the group, he would go the opposite way. But Clemson I think he really liked them, but he would not have chosen them if they were not opposite. She would be sent over by her boss. Get over there, Louise. You know how busy your daddy gets at this time. And he'd have to kind of push her out because she was, thought that. But she would go and she would help, and they were busy. And then she'd grab a sandwich or something and go back to the office. And I only went for probably 4 years, like to 4th grade, 1st to 4th grade. And that's when I got the rheumatic fever at age 9 or 10. And I was sick for those 6 years and bedridden those 6 years. And I really had no schooling except from my mother. She would read to me and then question me. She would teach me a word or words every day. And I got pretty smart, I think, with my mom. Well, the education that came after that is when I entered the nuns, the community of sisters who had a school there in Georgetown for little ones. But when I entered, I didn't have any kind of degree at all, obviously, because I had not gone. And they wanted me to they thought I was intelligent enough to be sure to pass the test. And so I passed an exam, a couple of exams. And so I became a senior and I got graduated. And our wonderful superintendent in Georgetown at that time just made this wonderful certificate of graduation for me, like I was somebody important. Dubuque, Iowa, for many years. And being in the Midwest was such an experience of difference because of the winters. I think I stayed in that area even after I left the community, but the weather got to me.
Yeah, to take care of your life. What did you do for a living?
I had really 2 degrees, 2 master's degrees, and one was in occupational therapy, and the other was in the intellectual thing of being somebody who counsels,
Right.
a counselor.
Right.
And I did that most of the years as my job. And it was always like the most great fun for us young ones, because they would take us with them.
Right.
Like Louise would drag me along. Slot machines mostly.
Okay.
That became very popular, and it became very unpopular with one of the police chiefs.
Right.
And they would come and take them out. And then somebody would come and bring them back. The Morgan House was owned by the Catholic Church. The bishop had his name on it.
Ooh.
And if he heard any bad stories,
Yeah.
he would be down there in Georgetown, and he would really fuss at those
Yeah.
priests. If he heard that they were keeping the lights on too long at night or whatever they didn't permit. I would have to say first, there were that front street and all of the businesses were Jews and Lebanese, Jews and Lebanese, Jews and Lebanese. Pete had these softball team and these young girls like 15 and 16 who loved him.
Right.
He was always kind, he was never fussy, and he would really teach them how to be good softball players. And they won a lot of games after he became their coach. And I think through the years, if we were like at George's,
Right.
and we'd be there would be some woman who'd come over and just grab him and kiss him because, oh, Peter, I'm always so glad to see you, you know, because he had coached probably her those many years ago. I think the love of his life was a person called Dolly, and Dolly lived in Andrews, our little old community over there. And Dolly and Pete were, I would say, sweethearts
All right.
for many years. And I think when Dolly finally gave up the idea that he was not going to marry her, she left him. My sis, I think, was probably the most dear and generous person that I could ever name. And that not because she's my sister, but because she was always the first one, especially within the Catholic group of so many Lebanese and non-Lebanese being Catholic. She would be the first one to put that chicken on and take it to the family who lost a family member, just like Mother had done all the years before her. One thing that still remains with me, you know, as a child that lived above the cafe, Front Street became a playground.
Right.
And we children like Pauline and Bev and all the ones that loved Front Street and they'd come from wherever they lived, and we would run up and down. We would play marbles. We would have some kind of game going. And all the business people loved it.